Let 'Em Go Barefoot is a podcast that dives into all things parenting and education through the lens of mindful awareness. Conversations aim to bring forward patterns, beliefs, and attitudes that shape our expectations and ideas about what it means to raise healthy children. With a blend of science, ancient wisdom, and intuition, we will explore ways to support, nurture, and connect with our growing children while also nurturing and expanding ourselves. I am grateful you are here. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Let 'Em Go Barefoot podcast. Today, I am talking to Adam Cohen. Adam is the creator of the Instagram page Brain Based Dad. Adam and I connected a while ago over DM to talk about some of the work that he was beginning to do. And Adam, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like at the time we touched base, you were just getting started on creating a program for parents in order to help them become more aware of and patient with their children. Is that correct?
Well, almost. I think at the time that we first connected, I was really just looking into if there was a way that I could use my knowledge of the brain and brain-based training to help parents and home ed parents. And I didn't at that point know what it was going to be or what it was going to look like. Um, and it was, through the course of reaching out to people like you and finding out what people were struggling with, that it came to be around helping parents increase their capacity and their patience.
Okay, perfect. So tell us a little bit about you, your family, where you are in the world, and sort of how you got to this place.
Cool. Well, I'm in the UK. I'm down in the southwest of England in Devon. I've got two children, 7 years old, a 7-year-old boy and a 2-year-old girl. And in terms of my background, so I'm going to go back all the way. So when I was growing up, I was one of those kids that the school system failed,
Mm.
and I tried a few of the school systems. So I went through state or public school. I went to Steiner schools. I was home educated and unschooled. I went to a democratic school, and then to top it all off, I went to circus school. So
Oh
I
my
really
gosh.
did the whole lot.
Yes, you did.
Um, So, in the course of being unschooled and home educated, one of the things that I got really into was juggling. Juggling was I just filled my days doing that. And
Mm.
when I got to 18, I didn't really know what I wanted to do, so I went to circus school and I trained to be a circus performer, and came out of circus school as a performer and didn't really love performing.
Mm.
Um, So after a few years of being a performer, I retired from performing. I had great joy in telling everyone that I was retiring in my mid-20s or whatever
Yeah,
it was at
sure.
that point. And I focused my efforts on being a teacher, and I ended up as a circus teacher running a circus school. Um,
Mm.
Mostly for kids. I do some stuff for adults as well, but um, most of my work was with children. So I was teaching circus skills to kids as young as 2 and all the way up to teens and beyond. I also worked at the National Center for Circus Arts and whatever. Somewhere in there, I spent a year in America, starting off working at a summer camp teaching juggling, and then worked for the Alternative Education Resource Organization, or AERO.
Oh, yeah.
Um,
Okay.
so that was probably 98, 99. I was working for them. And in the course of running a circus school and being a circus teacher, a friend of mine, a guy called James, who I have to give a lot of love and a lot of credit to, introduced me to the idea uh, of neurology and how the brain controls movement, and if we could use the way that the brain controls movement to help our circus students. Um,
Mm.
and so I started to get really interested in that. And he was doing, he was kind of way further down the path than I was at that point. So he was introducing me to a lot of new ideas about how the brain controls movement. And we started to introduce ways of helping our students get better at their specializations through brain-based training.
Mm.
And so, to give you an example of what that might mean, for instance, on a tight wire, if someone was struggling to walk on a tight wire for years, for like most of my career, it was like, well, either their ankle wasn't strong enough and their foot was wobbling around, or their core, their stomach and their core muscles weren't strong enough because they were wobbling around at the middle. So we had kind of two options if they weren't doing very well on the tight wire. One was strengthen their ankle, and one was strengthen their core. And we started to look at, well, what if you improved the function of their inner ear and their balance system?
Hmm.
And could we do that? And turns out, yeah, you could. And the moment that you improve the balance system in the inner ear, well, people can walk better on a tight wire. So it really kind of sparked some curiosity for me. And then that went on for, I don't know, a couple of years, until I really started digging into it for myself. And as I got more and more into learning about neurology and the brain, one of the things that I discovered was how to get rid of the chronic pain that I'd been suffering with for 20 something, 25 years or something like that. Uh,
Mm.
I managed to kind of clear up my own pain. That turned into helping other people with their pain, like my friends and my family, which then turned into, starting my own practice, helping people with pain, and then some more unusual things. Because, when you really kind of get into it, everything lives in the brain. So I
Right.
ended up helping people with chronic pain for one, but also unusual things that I never thought I'd help anyone with. Things like incontinence and post concussion rehabilitation and tremors in their hands and um, I don't even know what else, scoliosis and all sorts of stuff.
How about
Anyway,
that?
yeah, it was something that a circus boy like me, didn't ever think that I'd be able to help anyone with. Like, how would I help anyone with incontinence? But I did, and then at some point about I want to say about 3 years ago, maybe 4 years ago now, but I don't think it was quite that much. I found myself getting really um, overwhelmed and angry with my son
Hmm.
really, really, really frequently. And it was awful. Like I was like losing my cool 3 or 4 times a week over really small things. My son was a 4-year-old at that point, and he was just being a 4-year-old.
Right.
But whatever it was that was going on, 3 or 4 years ago, like we all remember what was going on in the world 3 or 4 years ago. Um, and I just found myself unable to control my reactions in a really unpleasant way. And it wasn't who I am. It wasn't who I wanted to be. It wasn't the kind of dad I was aspiring to be. And at one point, my partner said, "Adam, you got to do something about this, because if you don't, I'm out of here." For
Right.
him, for
Wow.
us, like, I'm out of here.
Yeah.
And that, as you can imagine, was a bit of a wake up call for me. And I started to go, okay, well, look, I know about the brain. If I can be more patient, the answer is going to live in my brain
Hmm.
somewhere. If I can help people with incontinence and persistent dizziness, I can clear that up for myself. So I started to go to work on the bits of my brain that either produce a stress response, fight or flight, or stop that, and keep that in check. And again, very quickly, it shifted around for me that after maybe, I don't know, 4 weeks of, I don't want to say like really intense training, but like moderately intense. It took some work, it took some effort, but it wasn't anything untoward. It was just consistent. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, it really had turned around that I wasn't losing my cool. I wasn't having to bite my tongue. It wasn't like, oh, I'm trying harder to be more patient. I just had more capacity.
Interesting.
And that's where I was like, okay, this is useful. This is going to be useful for other people. Do other people want that? Is that what they want? How can I help people with this? And that's when I started reaching out to people all over the world, just to go like, what if you're a home eder, what are you struggling with? What are the things that I might be able to help with? And that was something I had in mind, but it certainly wasn't anything that I was fixed on. It was
Hmm.
just this kind of deep sense that I had touched on something in myself that would help other parents, and the kind of parents that I wanted to help were home editors, because
Okay.
that's my tribe. That they're my people.
Yeah. Right. Well, gosh, you've said so many amazing things, and there's a couple of things I want to highlight. Um,
Mm,
One is the idea that you do have to be at some point capable of recognizing your faults and where you need to change. And sometimes that means somebody that loves you and sees your potential calling you out and saying, "I know you can do better."
yeah.
So it takes some serious self reflection and honesty to be able to say, "Yeah, you're right. I'm not doing what I need to be doing." But you knew that. You knew it in yourself.
I knew it, but I was almost like blind to the fact at how big an impact I was having on everybody else.
Mm-hmm.
You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. Well,
like when one of the things about losing your cool is like when you really lose it, and there have been a few times in my life where I've really, really, really lost it, and
mm-hmm.
it's deeply unpleasant for the person who loses it. It's you feel shameful and guilty, and it's horrible.
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to see, to really put yourself in somebody else's shoes and go, well, what was that like for them? Because we don't like to.
Right.
It's uncomfortable to do that.
Yeah, we like to
And
assume that what we're doing is and in some way, even though we know it's not the greatest way to handle things or to respond, we justify it because we were in a mood or it was just we got triggered or but we don't
yeah,
think about the fact that yeah, you're living in community with people in your family and in your broader community, and there are ripple effects
exactly.
for that behavior. So yeah,
And and it was probably the best, like it was probably how do I say this? That when you lose it, it's the best that you can do in that moment with the resources that you've got.
absolutely. Yeah.
You know, your brain takes over and does what it can to regain control, to protect you, to make sure that you're safe before anyone else.
Yeah.
That's your brain's main job before anything else, is to ensure your survival.
Mhm.
And that is at the expense of your relationships, your children, money, your 5-year plan,
Yeah.
your goals and aspirations, like anything. None of that is important if your brain thinks that you're in some kind of danger.
Right.
And it doesn't have to be a bear jumping out from behind a tree.
Mm-mm.
It can just be a feeling of being out of control. That's enough to flip your brain into fight or flight. And then that's the only thing that matters to it,
Yeah.
is how do I get out of this situation? I think it's kind of important to understand that and to give yourself some compassion for it was probably the best response that your brain could come up with at that moment.
But it still doesn't excuse.
It doesn't
Yeah.
excuse it.
It but makes you understand where it's coming from so that then you can then modify it and correct it.
Yeah, and I think that modifying your own behavior and correcting your own behavior you have to have a bit of compassion for yourself.
Mhm.
If you can't have any compassion for yourself, that it was the best that you had available to you at that time, there's not a lot of hope that you have the wherewithal to change. You've got to. I used to tell all my circus students, you've got to be two-headed about stuff, right? You've got to be able to hold two sort of conflicting ideas in your head at the same time to be able to progress. So this is one of those areas where you kind of have to be two-headed, that it's okay how you were and how you reacted, and it isn't okay how you were and how you reacted.
Mm.
And you've got to be able to hold those two things at the same time to be able to move forward. You've got to have compassion for yourself, as well as and be okay with what's happened without carrying that as baggage along with you for the rest of your life. And at the same time, you've got to have something greater that you want to aspire to.
Yes, an ideal to shoot for. Not that you'll get it, but
Yes.
that you shoot for it. I joked about making a t-shirt that said something like we simultaneously suck and shine.
Yes.
Because we do, and we're good, great, wonderful, but then we can be awful, nasty, horrible, rude. So, there's both, both and.
Yeah.
Um,
And if all you can focus on is, oh man, I suck. I
mhm.
suck, I suck, I suck, I suck, I suck, I suck, I suck, that's not going to get you very far.
No, not at all. Any
There's not a lot of growth and development in that.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Oh my gosh. Well, I have to ask, what are some of these things that you did? Because it feels almost magical. Like to be able to address scoliosis and tremors and post concussion and the things that you mentioned and incontinence. I mean, all of these things can be addressed with specific like actions that relate
Yeah,
to the brain. So how
yeah.
I mean, what first of all, how did you figure it out? I know you said you kind of just dug in and did research and you saw what you took what you were learning through your circus performing and teaching, but how did
And
you
I
pull these
started to
together?
take courses.
Okay.
I started to take courses on a form of applied neurology.
Okay.
Um, and I spent a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of money, quite frankly,
Mhm.
taking courses in neurology um, to learn more and more about the brain and how the brain works and what the different parts of the brain do. The brain is made up of, you know, we call them different things, right? Like you've got your frontal lobe and you've got your temporal lobe and your parietal lobe and your brainstem and your occipital lobe and your cerebellum. Like they're the kind of big sections of your brain,
Right.
and they all have different roles. Like your frontal lobe, which is right at the front of your head, right behind your forehead, is kind of the human part of your brain. That's the what people say is the seat of executive function. That's where creativity lives. That's where your planning and your goal setting lives. That's where your focus and attention lives. So if you want to be more present, if you want to be more focused, if you want to make better decisions, your frontal lobe has to work really, really well.
Right.
So it's also one of the parts of the brain where um, stopping unwanted behavior lives.
Mhm. The impulse
What
control.
impulse control?
Yeah.
Exactly. It's part of decision making,
Yep.
right? It's typically what's called inhibition. You have
Mhm.
to inhibit the desire to do something else. So
Okay.
not eating the donut when you see the donut and you want to eat the donut. I go, no, no, no. I said I wasn't going to eat donuts. I'm
Mhm.
not going to eat that donut. You have to, right? That's inhibition, right?
Yeah.
So it's also involved in incontinence. I
Oh.
feel the need to pee. I'm going to not pee,
Hmm.
right? So there's a part of the brain, a part of the frontal lobe, a small bit in the frontal lobe that is dedicated to inhibiting the need to go to the bathroom
Okay. Wow. So once you kind of understand where things live,
and how things communicate,
yeah. Okay.
the different pathways, the different wiring patterns between the brain and the body, then you can start to train them.
So what does that look like? Like a
So
training? Like I know you said for yourself, it took you some time. And once you recognized that you were losing your cool and not being as patient with your son, so you have to recognize it first. That's step one. You have to recognize it, you have to
yes,
call it out, you have to see it, you have to name it. And then step two is a decision to change it.
yeah.
And then step
So
three would be what?
uh, I'm not going to talk about it in steps like that, just because it's trickier for me to do it that way.
Oh no, that's
So
right.
the way that I
That's what I was going to tell you. I was like, I set it up, but totally change it how it makes sense.
learn. So I think about it like this, right? When I'll talk about myself rather than anyone else. When I lose my cool, when I lose my temper, when I no longer have the capacity to be patient, and I think we could probably all agree what gets triggered is fight or flight, right? You're
Mhm.
at a capacity and your brain takes over and you're either going to fight or you're going to run away. There are a couple of other responses that people have, but they're the big ones. That's what's known, right? Fight or flight. Fight is your brain's way of preparing you to engage in battle. And
Mhm.
flight is literally just run away, get out of here. Either one of them will produce a survival outcome, right? And your brain will decide which is the better outcome right then and there. But fight or flight is what happens when you lose your patience, whether that's yelling or shouting or, I don't know, banging and slamming doors or, becoming dominating and controlling and whatever it is, right?
Or shutting down and walking away, right? And just ignoring
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
that would be the flight,
Yeah.
right? And everyone's got their own particular expression of that, and how that comes out of them. But I am not a very Zen-like person to begin with. Right? That's not my default position. I am not someone that people would describe as calm and gentle.
Okay.
um, so if I start there, that losing my patience is the triggering of fight or flight. The first thing that I had to look at was, well, what informs your brain about danger? And your brain has basically three jobs, right? It takes in information from the outside world and the inside world, right? So you've got your five basic senses: sight, smell, taste, touch, and whatever the other one that I've forgotten is. Sound.
Sound, yeah.
Sight, sound, taste, smell, touch. You've got your five basic senses, and then you've got all sorts of other things. So that's the outside world. Then you've got your inside world, like the information about your blood pressure and your heart rate and your breathing and oxygen levels and CO2 levels and digestion and all of that stuff. And then you also have proprioception. Proprioception being your brain's awareness of your body in space.
Right.
Is my elbow bent or straight? Is there, what kind of weight is on my foot? Right? Your brain's got awareness of your body all the time.
That's also why I'm very much an advocate of barefoot children. Because
Yeah.
that ability to perceive yourself in space and time, and how there's so much in your feet. So sorry, I just
but it's everywhere. It's everywhere, and it's everything all the time. Right? So your brain's taking in all this information. That's job number one. Job number two is it has to process that information, interpret it, and decide what it means. Is this okay? Is this familiar? Do I remember it? What do I and then what do I do about it? Right? So it interprets and it makes a decision. And then it has to create some kind of output. And typically that's movement. But it's also changing your blood pressure. That's the kind of movement. That's vascular constriction, sorry. Right? Changes your heart rate, changes your breathing. These are outputs based on the information that came in and its decision about what it means. So it's got input, interpretation, and then output. Okay, so fight or flight is an output. It's impossible to get a good output if you're not getting good input. Bad input, you get bad output. If I want to write a beautiful, best-selling novel, and I sit down at my computer and I open up Word and I take my fist and I just slam on the keyboard with my fists, it's a lot of input. It's not going to get very good output. Okay, so bad input leads to bad output, and good input will lead to good output. So where I work and where I worked on myself a few years ago and where I now work with parents on is the input. And that falls into four main areas for me. So one is breathing.
Right.
Now, everybody knows that breathing is good. The first thing that anyone says when someone is, getting stressed is slow down, take a breath.
Right. Yeah. It's so powerful. So powerful.
It is. It's incredibly powerful. And I think that actually people don't realize just how powerful it can be.
I know.
It calms you down. And one of the reasons it calms you down is it gets more oxygen to your brain. More oxygen into your blood and more blood up into your brain. And in particular, more oxygen makes it all the way to the front of your brain, to that frontal lobe that we talked about a moment ago, that allows you to stop unwanted behavior. If your brain isn't getting enough oxygen, it can't do its job. Right. And unfortunately, just because of the architecture of the brain and the way that it's designed, the front of the brain is the last bit to get any blood. And it's the first bit to lose blood when you hit fight or flight. So when you hit fight or flight, blood flow stops going to the frontal lobe.
It makes sense. It really makes
It's
sense.
not very important for survival.
Yeah. It's just like you got to
Your
get out of there.
5-year
Go.
plan doesn't really,
Mm-hmm.
creativity
Nope.
doesn't really matter.
Nope. Right. And that's why that all that shuts down when you're stressed in like a school setting, but you cannot think things through. You can't dig deeper. You don't care. You don't care about the connections and all those sorts of things. You're just like, I got to get out of here. So yeah,
Yeah,
makes perfect sense.
exactly. So so breathing is the first one. That's a really, really, really big deal. Um, but I look at it not just from a meditative, well, let's sit with our legs crossed, light a candle, put some incense on, and take
Yeah.
deep breaths. The brain is very context specific. So
hmm
being able to breathe well in a meditative environment is all well and good. I want to be able to do it when I'm in the kitchen trying to cook two different dinners. My kids are shouting at each other. The phone is ringing. The food is burning, and all of that.
Yeah.
Right? Being able to breathe well in those moments is a whole other thing than when you're in a dedicated meditation for an hour.
Right. Yeah. It's a good to know that we have this ability to utilize our bodies without spending a penny on anything. Like we just use what we
Yeah.
have.
Yeah, and it's one of the reasons. It's one of the reasons why one of the things that I offer online is a free breathing program. It's a small. It's like the three essential exercises that everybody needs to be able to do, and one of them is getting their diaphragms moving properly, because most
Mm,
people don't move their diaphragm fully, and if your
yeah.
diaphragm doesn't move fully, you can't breathe properly.
You're making me breathe better right now. I'm sitting up and trying not to slump. It's so important, because you get into these positions at the computer and all hunched over and it's like, gosh, it's amazing how just sitting up and putting your shoulders back and taking a deep breath in can just sort of like reset you. So,
Yes, absolutely. And that kind of takes us to the second thing that I work on with people, which so you're talking about posture and how posture affects breathing. The thing that sets your posture is your inner ear. So I mentioned that before talking about tight wire, but your
mm-hmm.
balance system in your inner ear, part of its job is to set your posture. So I work on people's balance. I train their inner ear and what's technically called your vestibular system.
Right.
Okay, so we do a lot of vestibular training, which is like balance training, but on steroids.
Okay.
It's
That's awesome. Is that something that's done in someone's home, or do you have to be at a particular location? Do you use like specific equipment, or is this really can be done like with what
no,
people have?
I do everything at home, no specific equipment. There are bits of equipment that you can use to get kind of more and more and more detailed and more and more and more laser focused on stuff.
Okay.
But your the way your vestibular system works is it senses head movement. Um, I'm not going to go into the detail of it.
Oh
Honestly,
no, that's
it's
fine.
a
That's
little
totally fine.
tricky to do, especially without video and without being able to see things. But your inner ear senses your movement in space through the way your head moves. Okay, whether you're shaking your head left and right, whether you're nodding it up and down. So we use very specific movements and balance exercises to activate your inner ear and train your inner ear and develop its ability to um, do its job properly.
Okay.
Your brain spends a lot of energy making sure that your head doesn't hit the floor. That's a really big survival risk.
Literally is so important for us to keep it upright.
And falling is one of the leading causes of death.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know the statistics there, but there's a whole month. I think it was last month. Was it March that was fall prevention month?
Oh,
It's
okay.
like it's a big deal, right?
Huh. Yeah.
It may have been February, not March. I can't remember exactly when it was, but there's a month dedicated to it because it's a big deal,
Right.
and it's a big deal for your brain. It's a big survival risk, and if your balance is even slightly substandard, that increases the level of danger that your brain is perceiving all the time. So we're talking about input informing your interpretation. If your brain is unable to sense if you're on balance or off balance, that's concerning. So again, we're getting slightly worse input there. And
Mm-hmm.
if we can improve that input, we're going to improve the output. So that's the second thing. The third thing is vision and people's eyesight. How well can they see? How clearly can they see? As well as how well do they move their eyes? Most people don't move their eyes as much as they should. We spend far too much time looking at a screen.
Right. And especially now, I mean, this is a pretty important topic, I think you're about to touch on.
Yeah. So, you know, your eyes are designed to move, and the way we move them in the natural world is wildly different to how we move them in the modern world. So I train people how to move their eyes properly,
Mm.
how to accurately jump your eyes from one target to another, how to track objects as they move.
Would you say then it's fair to say that children who are spending a lot of time in nature are doing this naturally and they don't need to be trained?
Um, for the most part, for the most part, I mean, I'm not going to say that it would be perfect because modern lives, no matter how much time we spend outside, modern lives are different to the way we evolved.
Okay.
You know, the way that we moved, the way that we, um, the time, the what we did with our days is just vastly different to 100,000 years ago.
Right.
So, you know, and your visual system has been around for a very, very, very long time.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's not so different to apes, it's not so different to cats, it's not so different to dogs, it's not so different to lizards. It's, you know, it's it's one of the um it's one of evolution's like greatest successes. It's why it's so prevalent amongst species.
Okay. Yeah, and we as a society have so many options now and so many ways and things and stuff to do. It's almost like we've widened our choices, but we've narrowed our focus and it literally narrowed our focus. And that has had some pretty detrimental impacts, it sounds
Yeah.
like. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, even um spending time indoors, you know, if you spend a lot of your day indoors, your eyes never fully diverge.
Mm,
Right? The way your eyes move towards each other to focus on something close up versus move away from each other, that's convergence and divergence. Um, Visual specialists will say that your eyes don't truly diverge until you're looking at something about 40 meters away, 40.
yeah.
So 40 meters is a really long way. So if you're even indoors for 5 hours in the day, and I expect most people are indoors for 5 hours in the day, you know, a couple of hours in the morning, a couple of hours in the evening, before, you know, aside from when you're sleeping, your eyes are converged. They're not diverged.
And the reason why that's important is because like you said at the beginning, our eyes require diversity of vision and fields of vision in order to work as best as they can. Is that accurate?
Um, yeah. Although I'd say it a slightly different way, which is that anywhere where your brain can't get your eyes to do what they should be able to do is a danger for your brain.
Okay. So it really just all boils back or goes back to that brain impact.
Yeah.
Okay.
So if you hear a sound and you're like, what is that? And you turn to look at it and your eyes can't move quick enough and they can't find the target quick enough, they can't locate that sound, that's a danger. Does that make sense that that would
Oh
be a
yeah,
danger?
absolutely.
Right? The quicker you can find what that sound was, the safer you are.
Yeah. We joke all the time in our house, about our animals. We watch them and they'll turn their head to look at something and we're like, what do they hear? What do they see?
Mhm.
We're like, there's ghosts in the house, but it's just they're so attuned to their environment in a way that we are not.
Yeah.
And I think we could be better attuned. And it also kind of makes me think about people who've had injuries to some part of their body or a sensory organ. and how
Yes.
another sensory organ will step in and become more heightened. So if somebody loses their sense of smell, their hearing might get better, or vice versa, you know? So
Yeah,
is that just kind of the brain taking over and trying to encourage survival by making something else a little bit more prominent?
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Like in the same way that if you, I don't know, had a finger amputated, the bit of your brain dedicated to that finger would be sort of consumed by the fingers next to it. Like, let's say you lost your middle finger, your
Mm-hmm.
index finger and your ring finger in your brain would sort of encroach on that vacant space and go, okay, well, we'll use that space.
Yeah. Yeah. Our bodies are so cool. They really are.
Yeah. And our brains are so cool
Mm-hmm.
because when you lose your sense of smell, chances are it wasn't in your nose. Nothing happened to your nose. It was probably in your brain.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can have, injuries, and you can have brain injuries that affect this stuff as well. Visual issues, balance issues, dizziness, they are symptoms of um, traumatic brain injury. So if you
Yeah.
get a concussion, if you play rugby or football, or have a car accident and whiplash or whatever, they can affect you in very profound ways. Your sleep, your emotional regulation, all sorts of stuff.
Yeah. It's a real uh, ripple effect.
Yeah. And most people who have that kind of injury, and most of us have had some kind of head injury at some point. It doesn't take something major. Like, honestly, it could be standing up and, picking up food from the floor and banging your head on the table as you get up.
Hmm.
If it's a decent thump to the head, it can shake your brain around inside your skull, and
Yeah.
your brain's a delicate thing. It doesn't take being in a car wreck. It doesn't take being a quarterback.
Right. Like people do think about the brain injury as being something extremely traumatic, like very big, but it can be much simpler than that.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember as a child, I made I was at the beach and dug this big tunnel that I could crawl through the wet sand, and I was crawling through it, and the tunnel collapsed onto my head.
Mm,
I don't know if I had a concussion then. I was probably 5 or 6 years old at the time. I remember it very vividly, um, but it was probably enough that it could have given me a concussion.
yeah. Do you think children are uniquely built to bounce back from concussions in a way that adults are not?
I'm not really qualified to say, um, but their brain is changing
Mm-hmm.
much more rapidly. So it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case, that they could kind of trim away the um, neurons that are affected, and they
Mm-hmm.
would bounce back more easily just because of the amount of change that's happening in their brain.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm not really qualified to say, um, but it wouldn't be a like shock horror if it was discovered that that was the
Mm-hmm.
case.
Mm-hmm.
They can be more susceptible to concussion as well. Their necks are a little less developed and a little less stable. But anyway, so we got three of the four things that I focus on
Mm.
there. We got breathing, we got vestibular function, inner ear function, we got vision, and then the last one is movement. Because aside from survival, your brain's other job is movement. That's why you have a brain. Things that don't move don't have a brain. So I work on movement, and I help people learn to move every joint in their body and have control of every joint in their body. Because if you can't move a bit of your body, that's a worry for your brain.
Yeah. And in our very sedentary society, that's a problem, especially long term.
Yeah. Our brains, and as well as our bodies, function on a use it or lose it basis. So if you're not doing stuff, if you're very sedentary, yeah, your
Mm.
muscles are getting weaker. So's your brain. Your brain is degenerating. It's the same thing with your eyes. I mentioned being able to move your eyes. Like if you spend a lot of time with your eyes front and center looking at a screen and you're not moving them all the way left, all the way right, all the way up, all the way down, eventually you won't be able to, because you got to use it or lose it.
That's frightening.
Yeah. And then a lot of people have had injuries in the past. And those injuries, physical injuries like accidents, breaks, fractures, sprains, strains, whatever, and they don't get rehabilitated well. So they actually lose the capacity to move their body properly. And your brain wants you to be able to move, and it wants you to be able to move well, because that's a really big deal for your survival.
Yeah, I saw, I cannot think of the name of the book right now that I was reading, but it was related to the brain and childhood. And one of the things that the author mentioned was that the best things we can do for kids is to, let them play. The best things we can do for our kids' brains is not to basically sit them in a classroom setting and make them do academics all day, but to actually let them out of the classroom and play. And then they'll be
Yeah,
better at those academics and those thoughtful, really
absolutely.
hard problems to work through, that the play is primary and the academics are secondary, not the other way around.
Yeah, absolutely. Every part of your brain gets developed when you move. There isn't a bit of your brain that's not related to movement. The bits of your brain that deal with breathing are related to movement, because your breathing has to change to facilitate different kinds of movement.
Yeah. I just think it's important to talk about the sedentary lifestyle that we are in because, as you and I are talking, I have a little pokeball that I put under my feet and I just roll it around. And I tend to be a little wiggly anyway. I just wonder if there's a way that we can encourage people who do have sedentary jobs to find ways to keep themselves moving, even if they can't physically get up and move, or maybe what can they do to encourage movement in their life, in the lifestyle that they have now.
I'm sure everyone can find some way to move. And everyone has habitual ways of moving and things that they are drawn to as well.
Mm-hmm.
Some people like to be very fast, some people like to move very slowly. Like we have different ways of moving as individuals. One of the best things that people can do is move in a different way. Now, that doesn't mean you have to move fast if you're, naturally slower, but it's good to be able to do that. It's good to do it from time to time. It's good to let your brain know, hey, we can still do this.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
One
worry,
of the things.
brain. I got you. Like,
Yeah.
we can do this. You don't have to worry about it. One of the great things that people can do is like learn to move and control a bit of their body that they don't have good control over.
So would you say like trying to, well, I was going to say that
So
I had learned that walking backwards is a really good practice because it's not something that we do. Um, and yet it's really
really
good
good.
for us because it's using
Mhm.
all kinds of different
Yeah,
things that we hadn't thought about using when we're just moving
absolutely.
forward all the time.
Move forwards, move sideways,
Yeah. Yeah.
skip sideways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that brings me to a post that you made that we talked about before we started recording that I wanted to highlight, which is the closer a creature can get to an ancestral environment and the closer an adult can get to a childhood environment, the healthier they will be. Disrupt them as little as possible. So when you said skipping, moving sideways, it makes me think of an adult acting childlike. We think of skipping and bouncing and being all joyful and running and moving as children, but we all as adults could benefit greatly from getting back into that childlike mode. So can you explain that a little bit more and talk about how?
Yeah, so it's worth saying that those weren't original words by me. Um,
Right, that was Brett
they
Weinstein, an evolutionary
yeah.
biologist.
Um, so I was listening to a podcast, and he said that, and it struck me,
Mm-hmm.
and it struck me because I think that it's really important. So starting with the kids, I'm sure that all the listeners of your podcast would agree that it isn't natural to put kids into a school setting, sitting at a desk for 7 or 8 hours a day.
Mm-hmm.
It's just unnatural. Given what you and I have already said today about the brain's job, how it um, um, and how it works, it would make sense that putting your brain and body into a as natural an environment as possible, as much as possible, would produce better brain function and better brain health. For adults, I'd say that one of the big things that's really missing for adults is play.
Yeah.
Um, I don't think that Brett, meant that we need to behave like children.
No.
I don't, and it's certainly not why I quoted him and posted that. But I think that enjoying movement, having something that lights us up, bringing the kind of childlike wonder
Mm-hmm.
in how we see the world and how we interact with the world, has huge benefits. And I think that play is really at the heart of that. And play can look different for adults. It doesn't have to look like children. It doesn't mean, I don't know, playing tag or stuck in the mud
Yeah.
or something. But it doesn't have to be that.
Mm-mm.
Like, oftentimes for me, work is play because I enjoy it.
Yeah.
And quite honestly, I don't get a lot of time to do it as a dad who's home educating his kids. So sometimes I really want to sit down at my computer and do stuff and I love it.
Yeah.
But there are other times where I enjoy going out and doing some gardening or going and playing frisbee in the sunshine or whatever it is. Like, play is very unique to each person. And I think that if you can find a way to play, that in and of itself and that alone would have an enormous ripple effect on people's lives.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know.
Even if they only increase the amount of play by a very small amount, like 1%, go play 1% more. See what happens.
Yeah. And I think, like you said too, the idea of play sometimes does get an image in your mind of a kid playing in the mud or making, random things with arts and crafts. But it really is about losing your sense of time and immersing
Mm,
yourself in something that is bringing you that sort of inner joy. And
yeah,
whatever that looks like for you as an adult doesn't have to be the same that everybody else does. But if you're losing track of time, you're not worried about going from point A to B, and you're, analyzing everything, then you've kind of, you're losing yourself in play. And that's very powerful and important.
yeah, yeah. And the other thing that jumps to my mind is exploration.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oftentimes play is a process of exploration and discovery. Engaging in something that you don't know, learning something new is often very playful. Not when it's forced,
Mm-hmm.
but when it's by choice. Learning and discovery and exploration is incredibly playful.
Right. Yeah. I think I have said play is a child's love language. Um, and I think it's one of the biggest ways for people to connect to one another
Yeah,
and to also recognize our shared humanity. I mean, they say laughing is a worldwide language. Everybody from everywhere in the world understands what laughing is. And when we can laugh together, it's so powerful at connecting us to
yeah.
each other. And
It's also a really great way to tell your brain that you're safe,
mm,
you're not in danger.
yep, yep,
Like, play and laughter does not happen in fight or flight.
no, nope, it doesn't.
Like, that, it's so unimportant in those moments that if you are playing, like, bring play to cooking dinner.
Mm-hmm.
What can you bring play to? it doesn't have to be separate to the rest of life. It's not like, oh, this is work and this is play. No. What if you brought play to work? What if you were playful about your work, or playful about a conversation, or playful about hoovering or cleaning the house?
Wait, did you just say hoovering?
Yeah, vacuuming,
Ah,
sorry.
that's great. No, I love it. I love the different terminology across the pond.
Yeah.
um,
That it's I mean, Hoover the brand,
yeah,
like in the UK,
yeah,
it's a bit like what do you call it? Xeroxing.
y-
Like we would never say Xeroxing in the UK. Like you
exactly.
make a photocopy.
Right, right. And we use things like Kleenex. Like Kleenex is a brand, but we talk about
Uh,
tissues as being Kleenex. But
yeah,
yeah, that's great.
yeah.
Yeah, no, and I wrote something a while back about the opposite of depression is playfulness, and
Hmm.
that was one of the big things that I highlighted was the fact that to be in a state of joy is to be in a state of safety. And you
Mm,
don't find a lot of depressed people or super anxious people cracking jokes or being playful because they're in that fight and flight state. Um, so yeah, playfulness to me indicates health, mental health,
yeah,
good mental health. um,
yeah.
so yeah, that
For the most
for the
part.
most part, yep, sure, yeah. I mean,
I've known a few people in my time who are very jokey, including professional comedians, who it's more of a defense mechanism
oh
that actually they're incredibly anxious and they're incredibly
no,
stressed.
I totally get that. Yes, I'm meaning it more like on the family, like kids. Family
Yeah.
interact in like the smaller
Yes.
level, but you're right. Yeah, everything can be taken to the extreme or to be used as
Exactly.
a defense mechanism. Um, well, before I don't want to wrap up without us at least talking about the other posts that I highlighted um, of yours, which I want to encourage everyone to follow you at Brain Based Dad, which is on Instagram. Do you have a Facebook page too, or do you have any other social
No,
media?
I have a fledgling YouTube channel,
Okay.
which is the same. It's I guess youtube.com/brainbasedad or at brainbasedad or whatever. If you search there, you'll find it. Um, it's it's something that I started fairly recently. Um, so there's a handful of videos, and I intend to make more.
Okay, great. Yeah, no, keep going because that this is such important information, and I think you're explaining it through Instagram in very digestible ways. People, once you get a little bit of information, it's easy to take it to that next level and learn more. But so the other post was you don't need to get it right all the time to be a great parent. If you're a kind, patient parent about 70% of the time, you are doing well. And that was a quote from Judy Arnold. Arnold, is that
Hmm.
correct? Is that the way to say
Yeah,
it?
I believe so.
But then you also say when you lose your patience, kids just have to survive. The more patient you can be, the more your kids will thrive. And I want to highlight that because of the fact that your goal and mission is to help parents tap into their patients and or find their patients and cultivate their patients in order to make things like to make that relationship and that family dynamic and the environment a better happier healthier space for your kids to thrive and yourself too. It's not just about the
Yeah,
kids, it's about you as an individual too, because like you said from the very beginning, when you were in that state, you realized you knew something was not right and you felt it internally. And I know that impacted you psychologically in other areas as well. So when we can tap into our own understanding of where we're kind of going off the rails and then course correct, everybody benefits. So I just wanted to spend some time talking about that a little bit more
mhm.
and directing parents to where they can find more of this information that you're providing and how you support them there.
So what I'd say about that is that in the same way that play goes out the window when our fight or flight mechanism gets activated, like play is not important, learning is also not important. In the same way that what play goes out of the window when our fight or flight mechanism kicks in, learning also goes out the window. Learning is not important when we are in a stress state. And when you and I, as parents, lose our patience and our fight or flight mechanism kicks in,
Mm-hmm.
it stresses our kids and their fight or flight mechanism kicks in. We become the bear jumping out from behind a tree, and our children's desire to learn disappears. So, as home educators and or unschoolers, and probably in particular unschoolers rather than homeschoolers, if we want to let our kids learn in their own way, in their own time, and on their own timetable, we want a learning environment as much as possible. And that means a low stress environment.
Mm.
So we need to keep our own fight or flight system in check as much as we can. Because you
Yeah.
get this domino effect. Our fight or flight mechanism kicks in, our children's fight or flight mechanism kicks in, and then learning stops. And then if our kids, especially as unschoolers, don't want to learn, that becomes a stress for us as parents, that we start to get worried that they're not learning. But why aren't they reading yet? Why don't they want to read? Well, maybe it's because last time they didn't want to read, you yelled at them about it.
Mm-hmm.
And now they're stressed about reading because they had a stressful experience
Mm-hmm.
around reading. So you get this kind of domino effect where one thing tips into the next and into the next and into the next. So if, from my perspective, unschooling is a low stress state.
Oh, I like that.
It's
Yeah, I like the way you explain that. It really is. I mean, it's so much more than academics and education, right?
yeah,
It's deeper. It's very much about correcting generational wrongs
yeah,
and deeper diving into your own personal thoughts, feelings, attitudes, beliefs as the parents.
yeah. If you want your kids to be um, willing to come to you and ask questions, both when they're young and when they're teenagers, they need to feel safe doing that. And for them to feel safe doing that, we need to be someone that is safe to be around.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, patience is one of the hardest things because, like I said, it's not my natural disposition. I'm not like a, naturally angry person all the time, but I'm not a, you know, um, Zen monk.
Right, right. Many of us are
So
not.
yeah,
That's a very
and let's face it, parenting's hard,
yeah.
right? Parenting's hard. We need to give ourselves a break and go easy on ourselves. That this is a hard job. This is
Mhm.
the hardest job I've ever had, and it's relentless.
Right. Yes, and I think
you know,
that's important to highlight.
yeah, it's
That
relentless.
it goes back to earlier what you said about giving yourself compassion and grace
Yeah,
too.
yeah. So patience is key. If you're going to have a relentless job as a parent with all of the insults and provocations that go with it on a daily basis, and you want to, especially if you want to be an unschooler and you want to wait till your kids are ready to learn stuff like reading or maths or whatever, and that might be waiting for years, patience is important. And to be able to be patient both on the day-to-day basis when your kids don't want to put their shoes on to leave the house for an appointment, or if you don't want to eat the dinner that you cooked for them or whatever it is, and you also want to be patient kind of long term, weeks and weeks and weeks and years and years and years waiting for them to be ready to read, we need to have some ability with that, and it's not always something that comes naturally.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, needs to be cultivated.
Yeah, it needs to be cultivated. So just to kind of like circle back to everything, your brain goes input, interpretation, output, and the big inputs are those four things that we talked about: your breathing, your vestibular function, your vision, and your movement. Those are the big inputs. And if you get better input, you're going to get better output. So that's what I work on people with. And I train them how to move, how to breathe, how to see, how to move their eyes, how to, judge their movement and improve their balance. Because what that does is that creates safety for their brain. And the safer your brain feels, the less likely you are to get triggered, the less likely you are to flip into fight or flight mode, and the more patient you'll be naturally without additional effort.
Mm. Have you found that there's like sort of a sweet spot of time that it takes for people to sort of retrain their brains to operate a little differently? I mean, it's probably a hard question to answer in a blanket statement because it really probably depends on where people are starting. But I just wonder if it's like, give yourself 4 weeks, give yourself 8 weeks. Is it, have you found sort of a
It,
timeline?
it it's it's a tough one to answer. You're absolutely right, and it's tough for a number of reasons. One of which is exactly what you said, that it depends on where people are starting from. The
Mm-hmm.
other big one is, and this is the thing that I have no control over, none. As much as I would love to, I don't know how much work people are going to put in.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, so sometimes you can get results really fast, and sometimes it takes a much longer time. What I can tell you is that your brain is changing all the time. Every moment of every day, your brain is changing. Use it or lose it. So the things that you're doing, sitting on your seat, rubbing your ball on your foot, the things that you do, you get better at. So you're probably right now improving the sensation on the sole of your foot,
Mm.
and that's getting better. And the things that you're not doing, you're getting worse at. So what are you not doing right now? Sprinting. You're not sprinting right now. So you're getting worse at sprinting. Or long distance vision.
That's what I was just about to say. I'm not doing very good with long distance
Yeah.
vision, so I'm
Are
looking out
you
my
looking
window right now.
40 meters? Yeah. Are you looking 40 meters out of the window? Probably not. If you're anything like me, you've got your computer in front of you.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
so, so we are use it or lose it. So there are things that we are using, and moment by moment, your brain is changing and it's adapting towards the things that you do and away from the things that you don't do. That's not good. That's not bad. That's just the way it is. Right now, if
Yeah.
you want to be more patient, you got to practice patience and you got to do the things that are going to stop you from tipping into fight or flight. But there's one other part of patience that's really, really important that we touched on before, which is that front part of your brain, your frontal lobe, and its ability to inhibit. So even when you hit your limit, when your fight or flight system gets triggered, can your frontal lobe stop you from shouting or yelling or expressing it in ways that you know are detrimental? Can it calm your fight or flight system down quickly, even when you have lost control, to repair the damage? Because it's much better to repair and reconcile things fast than slowly. If you yell and 30 seconds later you can apologize and clear it up, that's way better than waiting a week. And a lot of people find that kind of thing really hard, to calm themselves down fast, to let things go. It's a skill.
Mm. Yeah.
So
And it's not something you learn once and then can apply it to everybody,
no,
or every situation, because every situation requires different skills and emotional responses from you. And so I think that's an important piece to highlight as well, because it's an amazing thing to be able to have more control over the way you respond to the world. It's powerful, not just for yourself and your family, but for everybody you come into contact with.
absolutely.
And I
Absolutely. So
think that's the ripple effect that's important about this brain-based understanding of yourself.
exactly. So to answer your question, how long does it take? I don't know.
Yeah.
In truth, I don't know. What I do know is that if people put 20 minutes a day into improving those primary systems, your breathing, your balance, your vision, your movement, that's probably enough over a couple of months to make some significant changes. That's what I tell people who come into my program, is that if they can put in a minimum of 20 minutes a day, Doesn't have to be in a block. That could be 4 lots of 5. And most people can fit that into their day. But if they can do that, they should expect to see some changes.
Yeah, that's amazing. Well, I will offer a little story real quick about something that I experienced years ago. In 2018, I took an 8-week mindfulness stress-based reduction class.
Brilliant.
So for one day a week for 3 hours, I went to a class with other people, and we learned about breathing and meditation and mindfulness and all the things, which is an area I've always been interested in anyway, and just psychology and human development. But so it was like, I just wanted to do this. And I joked about the fact that I wish I could have done like a brain scan before I went in and a brain scan after I left, because I felt like I was such a different person. And it wasn't like I was just high strung or high stress to begin with, but it definitely was someone who allowed past problems to build. And then when something would hit it, it would just all explode. So it was like I would repress sort of my feelings about things or my desire to deal with it. And then there would be a tipping point, and my daughter ended up getting diagnosed with type 1 diabetes right at the very end of that 8-week program.
Mm-hmm.
And I found myself in the hospital with her in the emergency room, in ICU, actually, breathing and saying kind things to myself and to her, and feeling this sense that it was all going to be okay, even though it was a really big life-changing moment for everybody.
Mm.
And so I just wanted to put a plug in for the power of that consistent work and desire to learn about these things and to realize that your brain is changing, like you said, whether you're doing something about it or not. So why not be proactive?
Yeah.
And make a choice that's going to lead you towards a better outcome and better output.
Yeah, exactly. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a pretty big deal. Well, I think what you're doing is a big deal, and I would love for you to let people know where to find you, how to get involved in the things that you're offering, and what's coming up for you.
So people can find me on Instagram or YouTube. That's Instagram's the place where I'm most active. So that's at Brain-Based Dad on both platforms. You can reach out to me there. I'm running my program again from the end of May. That'll be 8 weeks from the end of May. I'm going to take a select group of parents through the exact steps to having more capacity, more patience, so that they can give their kids an environment that they can thrive in.
That's perfect. Great. Adam, thank you so much for being here today.
You're really welcome. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening. To learn more about guests on the podcast and to stay up to date on how they are showing up to make the world a better place for children and families, please check the show notes. To become a part of the great educational awakening and to keep up with my latest writings, offerings, and workshops, be sure you're signed up for my Substack newsletter. You can also follow along on social media at Let 'Em Go Barefoot. That's LETEMGO Barefoot. If you are new to homeschooling, new to unschooling, or are simply unschooling curious but not sure where to start, we now have a beautiful 43-page downloadable guide that walks you through the how and why of self-directed education and child-led learning, as well as responses to common questions and concerns around academics, motivation, college, community, and more. You can find a link to purchase your copy in the show notes. Thank you so much for your support. As always, stay curious, stay connected, and stay aware. Until next time.